everybody. My name is John Wilmshurst. I'm the science coordinator in Jasper National Park, and I have the functional lead for southern mountain caribou recovery in the mountain national parks. That includes Jasper, Banff National Park, Kootenay, Yoho, Lake Louise area, Mount Revelstoke, and Glacier National Parks. Here today to talk a little bit about what Parks Canada is doing specifically for the recovery of southern mountain caribou in our lands. About a month and a half ago, we announced this conservation strategy you see on the screen before you, and a partnership with the Alberta government, or the BC government, and the Calgary Zoo to implement some pretty significant recovery efforts. So, it's a little bit different crowd than I'm used to giving a talk to. Normally I give presentations in the Parks Canada context to people who don't know a lot about caribou. So a lot of this presentation will be things that you obviously know very well. We're talking about the southern mountain caribou distribution. In this case, in the mountain national parks, they are woodland caribou, but they are not boreal caribou. So they're not covered under the current boreal caribou strategy, but that separate document was discussed a little bit earlier. And this is the distribution of the caribou you can see before you. That touches upon Jasper National Park, Banff National Park, Mount Revelstoke, and Glacier. This species is considered threatened under this Parks Canada, or under Canada's Species at Risk Act. And recently, in fact, just last week, I got an email which said that the designated units for southern mountain caribou, or that whole woodland caribou species, is being changed. Normally, we were considering that the recovery of these species was covered simply under southern mountain caribou, and we're participating in that process with Environment Canada. But it seems like in the future that designation will change, and Chris alluded to this earlier in his talk as well, that the caribou in Jasper and Banff will actually be considered in the future likely central mountain caribou, and southern mountain caribou will be the Caribou Revelstoke Glacier. And largely this is because of the different ecotypes, the foraging habits of those animals. I don't think that means very much for their conservation. It might mean something for how the recovery planning is done, but this is something likely for the future. The current status of southern mountain caribou in Canada's national parks. It's not very good. In fact, we consider it to be really poor. We have, in Jasper National Park, we have essentially two herds. A northern herd that's transboundary that goes from Jasper National Park into the Wilmore Wilderness area north of the park and out into the unprotected province. Approximately 150 animals in that herd. And then we have a group that's divided into three herds in the southern part of Jasper, 54 animals in the Tonquin, 11 animals in the Brazeau, and 6 animals in the Moline. These numbers come from an annual monitoring effort that we do, so these counts came about in the spring. These are pretty accurate numbers. It's pointed out to me earlier that there are more people in this room today than there are caribou in southern Jasper right now. We do quite a bit of monitoring of the animals in the park. We're pretty confident with these numbers. All these populations are not only small, but they are declining. Mount Revelstoke and Glacier National Parks, the numbers there are also very small. The Columbia South herd, approximately 7 animals. The Duncan herd, approximately 7 animals. Again, we don't have large count, or we don't have super counts on these ones, but we're pretty confident with these numbers. Obviously, give or take a few doesn't seem to make much difference. These are critically low populations. And in Banff National Park, quite infamously, there are no caribou, or at least no confirmed caribou. For the last couple of years, for sure, there's been no caribou in that area. We've had no confirmed sightings. There was a herd of 5 animals that was roaming in the northern part of Banff, an area not very far actually from the southern boundary of Jasper, and they were all killed in an avalanche in 2009, which really reflects the kind of imminent threat that all of these herds are in when they get to small numbers. So, we've been working with partners in both provinces, Environment Canada, universities for a very long time on caribou conservation issues. We've had a committee looking at caribou that's been standing for 5 to 7 years, predates my time here in Jasper National Park. We've written a number of plans, a number of strategies, but recently we've finally been able to get agreement from all the senior managers right up to the head of Parks Canada to come up with a document that we're calling the Conservation Strategy for Southern Mountain Caribou in Canada's National Parks to get those managers to actually commit to particular recovery actions and identify what the threats are and take real steps towards recovery of these very small herds in the national parks. We were able to get a ministerial announcement at the Calgary Zoo to launch this particular document. I've got a couple with me. I've got some links to websites as well if you're interested. This is, as I think Dave heard you talked about with their policy document. This is a high-level document. Whenever we get caribou experts that look at it, they're pretty disappointed because there's not a lot of meat there. But what it does is it outlines all of the actions, all of identifies the threats that we think are important for caribou in national parks, and it says what we are going to broadly commit to achieve recovery for caribou in national parks. There are accompanying documents that go along with this for more people with a little bit more expertise and want to know a little bit more. But this is sort of a gateway to caribou conservation for the Canadian public. And one of the things that we're really cognizant of is at the same time that we're releasing this conservation strategy, Environment Canada is working on a recovery strategy. So we always want to be very clear that they're two very different things. Our document is only concerned with what's going on in national parks, although it obviously feeds into the greater recovery process. And so what we use this diagram to show at the bottom of the screen here is the general public who contribute to a number of conservation efforts. So, for instance, management plans, which again give broad direction to management in terms of conservation and all activities in national parks. They also lead to this conservation strategy. The conservation strategy itself feeds into the recovery strategy in principle. So how Parks Canada will participate in that recovery strategy. We actually wrote an earlier document, which we were calling the Technical Compendium, which was written very much like an action plan. And Chris Ritchie alluded to this in the questions. When the recovery strategy is prepared, it's up to land management organizations to implement that. And in the federal government, that's Parks Canada. We are a land management organization. We would be there to implement the recovery strategy. And so in advance of a recovery strategy for the Southern Mountain Caribou actually being written, we came up with a fairly detailed action plan which would allow us to get ahead of the curve on recovery actions and take care of these small herds of animals that are already on our lands. Importantly, in our recovery or conservation document, we identify 5 key threats that we feel are the issues that we have to tackle in order to receive recovery of caribou in the national parks. And each one of these is either currently being addressed or we're planning to address. And these 5 are altered predator-prey dynamics, predator access, direct disturbance, habitat loss, and small population effects. Actually, 4 of them are only threats, and one of them is sort of a broader biological principle. I'll go through them here. I mean, most of you know what these are, but for the sake of clarity, let's go through them. Altered predator-prey dynamics is essentially that process where you have an abundance of alternate prey, deer, moose, essentially those 2 species for us in Jasper anyway. And that means that those subsidize a predator population that, as essentially a bycatch, take caribou as a result of the simple abundance. It is apparent competition, essentially, in scientific terms, what this is. And so we've known that certainly in Jasper National Park and also in Banff, that by having town sites that promote growth of elk populations, that our predator populations, certainly in the main valleys, were being subsidized by those high elk numbers. And so the actions being taken were to try to lower the elk populations in Banff and Jasper. And in fact, in Banff, it's worked quite spectacularly. The work that they've done there to move elk out of the town has reduced the populations quite dramatically, and we're seeing also declines in our elk populations in Jasper, to the point where, even just a few years ago, they were considered hyperabundant in Jasper, and they're no longer considered that today. So we feel that our management actions here have been pretty effective at trying to restore a predator-prey balance. The onion in the fruit salad here is white-tailed deer. Those populations appear to be increasing in all our national parks, and yet we don't really have a handle on it. And how those are affecting wolf populations in particular is very unclear. We're starting to study that. Predator access is largely for us a winter issue. For us, it is when we allow people to ski or snowshoe, or we actually facilitate that by track setting or plowing roads into caribou winter habitat. And by doing so, we facilitate predators getting into those areas with a fairly small energetic cost. In a large extent, we have stopped doing that. So in places, and I'll show you some examples in a few subsequent slides, we are reconsidering our recreational opportunities for visitors in the winter and ensuring that anything that we certainly provide is not entering into caribou winter habitat. Direct disturbance for us has always been smacking caribou on the road, on the highways. Largely Icefields Parkway for us in Jasper and Banff is an area where we've had, in the past anyway, some caribou mortality on the highways. That's no longer the case, probably for two reasons. One, we've reduced the speed limit there, although it doesn't seem to deter a lot of people from traveling quickly on that road. But also the caribou populations there are so small, they're actually not very frequently on the highway. Also, this is direct encounter with hikers and people working and entering caribou habitat both in the calving season. And this is a quite tricky one to kind of quantify. Caribou are quite curious animals, and one of the feedback bits that we get a lot from visitors is that they'll go to a place like the Tonquin Valley, and the caribou will actually come up to them. And so they're curious as to, well, why are we so concerned about people disturbing caribou when caribou seem to be coming to them and you know, checking them out? And you know, it's a bit of a tough explanation, but you know, certain times of the year, clearly caribou are quite sensitive to disturbance, and we try to make sure that those times of the year we're protecting caribou as much as possible from that direct disturbance. And habitat loss is something that we can experience in national parks. Certainly catastrophic fire is something that will devastate caribou habitat, and we've had some studies recently with postdoc Mark Helowitz at the University of Montana to look at what's the most effective approach to preventing habitat loss by wildfire in national parks. And we're working with our fire management crew to ensure that we're setting up fire guards and things like that that will protect those large habitat loss pieces. Largely in national parks, so we have an abundance of good winter habitat for caribou. Mountain caribou is, again, as Chris pointed out earlier, you'll see there's a lot of repetition here between what we're suggesting and what the provinces, both Alberta and BC, are doing in principle, because essentially it's the same issue, and we know what the solution should be. Habitat, where was I going with that one? I forget, I lost my train of thought. Okay, doesn't matter. Habitat loss is an issue for us. It is one that we are cognizant of. Oh yeah, but we really only house the winter habitat for migratory species like this one. Summer habitat is outside the park, and that's something that we have to work on restoring by negotiation with the province. Small population effects we saw in spades with the herd in Banff National Park. And when you have small populations like that, you can have demographic catastrophes, or you can have natural catastrophes. So one avalanche wipes them all out. Certainly our Brazeau herd and our Maline herds in Jasper are vulnerable to that, as are the herds in British Columbia that go into Mount Royal-Silk and Glacier National Parks. Small population effects also include things like demographic bombs, where you have one cohort that's all one gender, so all males and all females, and so that population will almost by definition, unless there's some intervention, go extinct. Okay, so what are we doing now? And I talked a little bit about this in this last slide. This is in Mount Revelstoke National Park, an area called the Mount Klotz area, Mount Klotz, I guess it's called. And it is an area of important caribou habitat, and we have closed this to winter recreation. It was a popular skiing area in that part of British Columbia for visitors to the park. We've closed that in the winter now because it's considered to be too sensitive for caribou habitat. We are doing a similar thing in Jasper National Park, preventing winter use of winter habitat in an area called the Edith Cavell Meadows. So in the past there was a road there that was really popular for high aerobic cross-country skiing. You could ski up this road, really get a good workout, and take your way to the meadows, which is perfect caribou winter habitat. And our research indicated that not only were our skiers using it, but wolves were using it. So we not only stopped track setting that area, but we entirely closed it. So by superintendent's order, that area is now closed in the winter. And there are there's a hostel and a couple of outfitters in that valley that can't use that area in the winter at all now as a result of that management And we are working in Banff National Park, and there's been a lot of research being done there, mostly spearheaded by Jesse Whittington, who's the wildlife biologist down there, looking at the conditions that will permit reintroduction of caribou to Banff National Park. I know this will be controversial with people like Stan, but it is really an objective for national parks. And Mark Hellwhite published a paper about what a sad state it indicates when caribou are extirpated from a national park. And so we're looking at fire effects and predation effects in habitats in Banff National Park to ensure that we understand the conditions that will be appropriate for reintroduction of caribou into that park. And finally, we're still doing quite a bit of research on research and monitoring. So we're continuing to monitor our populations in all the national parks where they continue to exist. We have an ongoing, I'll talk about the collaring program in a minute. We're still looking at habitat protection and how we do that functionally when we have threats of wildfire happening in the parks. This little slide of caribou scat here is a reminder to me that we have recently actually stopped our collaring program for population size monitoring in Jasper National Park because we've been so effective with the DNA analysis from scat collection that we're getting good mark recapture estimates from that alone. So we no longer have to capture and collar our caribou to get estimates on our population size. We can do that now from simple scat collection, which is a little bit, obviously a lot less invasive for the animals, saves us a lot of money that we can put towards other conservation activities, and we hopefully will be effective in monitoring population size in the future. And then the fourth one on this slide is the partnership that we have with the province of British Columbia and the Calgary Zoo to begin a captive breeding program of caribou at the Calgary Zoo. Some analysis that we did indicated that, obviously we're not going to get caribou back in Banff through natural dispersal. There aren't source animals. And the populations of caribou in Jasper and Mount Wilson Glacier are also small and essentially declining. If we're going to recover those species, we have to find a source of animals from outside the parks to bring in to augment those populations or to reintroduce. Our analysis indicated that there isn't really a good long-term source. This is a 20-year program. You can't just do this overnight. You can't expect to be able to do translocations from a source herd indefinitely. So we thought that the best option was to establish a captive breeding program where you could have a source of animals from captive reproduction. And so we did an analysis of a number of different options, and really the best option by far in the end was to work with the Calgary Zoo to take wild animals from the province of British Columbia and some of those herds that Chris was talking about earlier, where they have herds are robust enough where they can take some where you can remove animals relatively safely and bring them into the zoo, breed them, and then reintroduce them into both the national parks back into British Columbia where they're needed in other jurisdictions that are prepared to participate. So we have this document. It's available at this website, Parks Canada /caribou. It is available for public comment until the end of January, although it's a living document essentially, so we would accept comments from certainly people who know about caribou essentially for the life of the document. It does outline very clearly what it is that we want to do, and what's really important here is that we understand that we're not going to be able to recover southern mountain caribou on our own. We can only do it on our lands, but we want to work with partners outside the lands to ensure that there's effective caribou recovery actions being taken across the range of southern mountain caribou.